Hello again. My name is Corey Wakefield, and welcome to another installment of our Header and Footer Builder partial series, where we're taking just a little bit of time to run through these reusable bits of markup styling and scripting that we use in various elements throughout the builders. So today we're going to have a little chat about the search partial and just see what it has to offer us. Now, before we dive right in, I want to just let you guys know a little bit of how this is set up. So this element that visually looks like an input is actually a little self-contained form, and the physical input is inside there. So why we did that is because the form itself serves as a flexbox container for, one second here. So we've got three elements in here. We've got our submit, our actual input inside the form, and then we also have this clear button over here. So that's a pretty common little pattern you'll find on a lot of search inputs. And because that is a flexbox container, you'll always be assured that your content is centered vertically. And then you can also play around with the ordering of how things fall. So you could put, the physical input here first, and maybe move this submit to the end and put this clear button in the middle. And you'd really be amazed at, how many different kinds of looks you can come up with being able to just shift those elements around a little bit. So that's a really cool little feature of the search input itself, and just kind of a little backstory on how it works. So to start off, we have our base font size like most elements, and then we've got a few dimension controls here. So our width, height, and max width, and that should be more than enough to play around with all sorts of layouts, such as right here, where we've got a full width search that is taking up 100% width of the bar and 100% height. And we've got no max width, so it spans everything. Now, you could take a look like this and pair it with a feature such as the sticky bar and set your height to 100%, and then you'll have all sorts of cool functionality, like as you scroll and the bar shrinks, the search will shrink with it. Lots of fun stuff you can play around with there. So definitely do not overlook the power of those dimension controls and getting your elements situated just right within your bar. And then, of course, we have our background controls here. Now, for the base and interaction styles, one thing that should be noted is they're a little bit different on a few of these. So, for example, you'll notice that on this input, my background is this kind of transparent gray by default, but then when I focus, it turns white. Now let me clear this out. But for example, for the text, you'll notice that my text stays this light gray even when I'm focused, and then when I start typing, I get my darker gray color here. So the interactions are mixed up a little bit here in the sense that they trigger on different events. So, and it's really just set up in a way that you don't have to think about it, but they are kind of set up in a way to respond to user feedback in kind of the best way possible. So just kind of keep that in mind when you're designing this, that some of your colors might not always match in the way you think they might. Again, like this wouldn't turn white until you focus, and this wouldn't turn dark gray until you start typing. So just something to keep in mind there when you're kind of getting your design in place. Clear this out. You have the ability to update the placeholder text here. So you could say start typing to just encourage a little more user interaction there. And then, like I said, we can adjust the order of our items here. Now, when you do this, keep in mind that the design you're using for a particular element and its current positioning might not work when you shuffle it around. So you'll always have to adjust things a little bit whenever they shuffle. And a cool way to kind of see how this works is you can play around with the presets we have. I'll run through those here in just a second, and you can kind of see how the different layouts are set up. So we have overall margin for our input here, or the form. You can specify a border, and that would be around the entire form here. We've got our border radius. That's what's giving us the kind of pill shape here. If we did 0, we'd see that go back to a square. And then you have your box shadow control here. Now what I'm doing here is a little bit of an approach that I use for when I want something to appear kind of flat at first, but then have a little depth later on. So you'll notice that there's no shadow here, but then as I focus, I get that drop or that box shadow to give it a little depth. So what I do for that is I will set the base style as transparent and then give my interaction style an actual color. And it will just transition in. And it's a really cool effect to give you a lot of different styles, and you can play around with different looks. Really cool with that. So once we're done with the kind of macro design options, you have your input controls here. So the input, again, is styling the actual input inside of what is this kind of styled input that is the form. So when you're styling this, you're actually styling this bit of text right in the middle here. So we can, for example, add a little bit of margin. So you might want to add some spacing between that input and the button right here. And you can use that to adjust things as necessary. I'll kind of show you how I go about that in a little bit here, but just keep that in mind. And then you have full text format control over that input. So you can play with weights, you can adjust font size independently, letter spacing, play with italics, text transforms, everything that you're used to using across the board throughout other aspects of the builder. Next, we have our submit and our clear styles. Now, these are both exactly the same, the amount of options you have, or the types of options you have. So I'll just kind of run through one of them, but know that you can make independent adjustments to each and style them as you need. So for our submit here, we can set up our base font size, which right now this is a little smaller, but we could adjust that if we wanted. And then you have control over the stroke width of your icons here, so all the way up to 4. So again, this does great for, kind of allowing you to fit the look of the icon or the input into your design a little better. Sometimes you need something a little more sleek and modern. Sometimes you want something a little more kind of in your face. It's a subtle little touch, but it does make a difference. And then we have width and height controls. So this is really good for if you have a physical kind of button style you're trying to create here. So notice if I bump this up to 2, see how my button expanded there. Bump this back down here. And then here are the colors for that input. So it's white on both base and interaction. And then I've got my grays here that are changing on hover. And then you've got a margin control, so you can adjust the spacing for the button. And so this is a little trick I'm doing here to kind of give this faux padding border kind of look around here. All I'm doing is applying this margin around here, and there's actually margin around the clear button over here as well. So if I cleared this out, you won't really see anything different because I'd have to change it on both to get that look. You can also add a border to this button here. We've got our border radius to adjust that, and again, full box shadow control. And then again, all of those controls are repeated for your clear button over here. Now what's really cool is this exact same partial is utilized in our modal search, and we've kind of talked in our drop-down modal and off-canvas video about some things you can do to get some really cool responsive styles here. But you can see here kind of a drastically different look from the style we have inline here. And actually, let me just take a moment. We'll try a few different presets here. So here's the ethos one. Here is icon. So notice here, we've done some of that reordering. We've got our input at the first spot. Our clear button is now in the second spot, and our submit is at the end here. And these are all a little bit different. So the inline style for icon actually does match the modal style, whereas the inline style you saw for integrity earlier doesn't quite match this integrity style. It's a very different look here. So you can play with all sorts of different colors and layouts and sizes and and just get, a wide array of different outputs. A fun thing to kind of do with these is take some time and maybe look at, a website you like online. Maybe it's just, Google or YouTube or DuckDuckGo or a search engine, or even just a site you frequent. Find an element, whether it's a button or a search element, and try to just recreate it with the builder as close as you can, and play around with the options, get used to how they work. And that's a really great exercise to use for kind of stretching the old design skills there. So that is essentially the search partial. I believe that pretty much covers everything we wanted to discuss there. Do keep in mind, like I mentioned too, that the margin you have around these inputs, these buttons, it's very important to know that and the margin around your physical input in here serves as a good way to space things out. So there's all sorts of ways to space things in here. For example, my submit button has a little bit of margin here, but if I zeroed that out, I could get a more inline look where it's butted up right against the edge there. And I bet I could probably even take a little bit of negative pixel there to remove that border. So there's all sorts of tricks you can play with. You can add this back. And for example, right here, you'll notice if I do so I've got a super long search in here, but my text is not butting up right against this button here. How that works is we have our button, and we're using the width as since we're using this kind of transparent button style, we're using the width as a way to push the contents of the input away from the physical appearance of the X here. So we can make this a little bit longer. Actually, we'll make this a little bit longer, the width. And so notice that we've got more spacing now between the text and that input. So just all sorts of little tricks and ways you can space things out, move things around, and achieve different looks with the search partial. Thanks, guys.